As we are getting started right now, I'm going to do our usual thank yous, which I think is always important to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you very much to Bloomington Township, to the IU Credit Union, the Community Foundation of Monroe County, Duke Energy, and Old National Bank. We really appreciate all the sponsorships that you've done. This is, of course, our last wake up of the season, and are deeply appreciative for all their support throughout the season. We're definitely appreciative of all the support of the people who have been attending these meetings. It's not always the most fun thing to do at 8 o'clock in the morning is to tune in and pay attention to issues that are affecting your community. But we realize that the payoff is great, and we deeply appreciate people participating in these events and taking some of their insights to have an impact on the community and to really take some sort of meaningful action to improve the conditions in our own community and beyond. So my name is Mark Fraley. I am the Associate Director of PACE, the Political and Civic Engagement Program at Indiana University. We are a proud co-sponsor of the Wake Up series with Monroe County United Way. And today we're going to be talking about workers' rights issues, particularly in the face of pandemic, and what workers have been experiencing over the past 18 months, and what are some of the implications for the labor movement. Today we have with us Derek Cronin from UAW Local 440. We've got Joe Varga, Labor Studies Professor at Indiana University. Unfortunately, Ray Hobbs of Labor's Local 741 got called away at last minute for a statewide building trades meeting in Indianapolis. So we will not have the pleasure of his attendance with us today, but he sends his regrets, and I know that he wishes he could be here with us. So I think I want to get started. I know Professor Varga has prepared some materials for us to talk a little bit about the situation that is going on nationally with regards to the labor movement. And so, Joe, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure, Mark. Thanks. Thanks to Mark and to Efrat and to Jen for inviting me. This is my second Wake Up with the United Way in the last year, and I've enjoyed the first one, and I'm sure we'll have a good time today. We're missing one panelist, so I've now been told that this thing I was supposed to cram into like a 10-minute presentation, I can now babble a little longer. So I'll probably do that. For those of you who know me, you know, if you ask me what time it is, I will tell you where in the global supply chain your whatever timing device comes from, and why it's important to know where the workers are who made it. So yeah, I want to talk about a few things. I first want to talk about how good it is that I've been invited to this, and I'm being invited to a lot of other things, and so are my colleagues in the Labor Studies Department. By the way, we are the Department of Labor Studies. We are a small yet feisty department. We are within the IU School of Social Work, which is a great school. And we teach courses on work, labor, the history of organized labor. And again, yeah, we're a small department. We are struggling, but we are now relevant again, because the question of workers and workers' rights is really kind of come to the fore, and is in I had that piece in the Herald Times a couple of weeks ago talking about the concept of Striketober, which was in the month of October. A bunch of strikes broke out, major strikes. There were strikes threatened, and was talking about the idea that of Striketober and whether this was a strike wave or not. So I'm also going to hit on that during my talk, but it's just good that people are paying attention to workers' issues and issues of workers' rights. People don't, when I say people, I mean, mainstream journalism and the public at large often don't pay attention to those things until workers themselves start to get loud, and workers themselves are getting loud right now. And so I'm fielding a lot, and the department is kind of fielding a lot of calls from journalists and other sources saying, hey, what is going on right now with the labor markets and with workers? So it is good to be relevant again. Those things, again, they come and go, they're cyclical. So if I were giving a formal talk today and I had a PowerPoint and all that, I would call this talk Everything's Great, which sounds like an odd thing to title a talk when we've got a global pandemic and we've got the disruption of labor markets and we've got disruptions in the global supply chain and and inflation fears. But the reason I would have called it Everything's Great is I want to talk about things that have been labeled great. And the big one in American history, and this is to set some context for what's going on right now with workers. The big one in American history, of course, is the Great Depression, right? We all know the Great Depression, 1929, set the stage for the New Deal and the dawning of the federal guarantee of workers' rights and all that. So what I want to talk about today is about 5 different greats that some of which we know about, like the Great Resignation. That's what everybody's calling this worker shortage. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but people are calling it the Great Resignation. People like Paul Krugman and, Friedman in the New York Times. But I want to talk about the other greats as well, because I think that the Great Resignation should actually be called the Great Refusal. And that's where I'm going to end up with this talk. But I also want to talk about what we could call the Great Disruption, which was COVID, and how COVID disrupted business as usual. I want to talk a little bit about the Great Recession of 08 and 09, which I don't think we've ever gotten over, and I think really changed a lot of the views of American workers toward the system itself. And I'm going to talk about the Great Resignation, but what I want to start talking about is something called the Great Decoupling. And this gets into a little bit of academics and a little bit more of a technical term, but I want to talk about the Great Decoupling because I think it's key to understanding where we're at today. And finishing with what I'm calling the Great Refusal. So the Great Decoupling, what am I talking about? It's not my phrase. If it had been, I'd be much more famous than I actually am. It's actually a phrase that was coined by some very smart folks at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, some economists and whatnot. And people like Thomas Piketty, who wrote this book I'm looking at on my shelf over here, is 700-page book that I and 7 other people read called Capital in the 21st Century. It's this huge examination of the long-term patterns of the capitalist economy. And what the Great Decoupling is that for over 100 years, as far as economists could determine, and this was like one of the laws of capitalist development, there was a coupling or a merging together of 2 factors. One was productivity and the other was workers' wages. And for over a century, when you had rises in productivity, you had workers' wages would follow it. You could chart it on graphs. And it was what we get in the 40s through the 70s with the rise of workers' wages and the rise of a new middle class from the working class. And people like my dad, who had a 6th grade education, who had a new car and he had a house, and we took vacations on his union wages. So that is the coupling that these MIT folks and people like Piketty are talking about. The Great Decoupling that they're talking about, which I think is the historical context for what's happening today, is around, the 70s into the 80s and accelerating through the 90s and through the new period of globalization, the Thatcher-Reagan regimes of neoliberalism. You get a decoupling. You get rising productivity and workers' wages either stagnating or actually decreasing. And that is the thing that I think sets the stage for today's disruptions, for the resignations, and for the refusals. And so we've had 30 to 40 years of this. And economists can look at this and say that there's a role played by technology and machine processes that increase productivity without necessarily dragging wages with them. But economists that I read, who I respect their work, have also said a key factor in this is the 30 to 40 year assault on workers' rights and on union rights and the decline of union density. Very simply put, you go from 38% of private sector workers being unionized in the mid 1960s to today, what do we got? We're about 6-7% right now, Derek. Yeah, and that's a huge difference. And that means that workers lack the bargaining power to drive up their wages when they know they should be getting raises because productivity is going up, meaning the capitalist firms' profits are going up, but their wages are not following it. So that's the Great Decoupling, which I think is the key to understanding the Great Recession of '08 and '09, again, which I think we've still not really fully understood. But it also, there was a contributing factor of a lack of purchasing power from the working class. That was the result of this Great Decoupling, bringing us up to what we could call the Great Disruption, which is COVID. Other people have called it the Great Disruption. What COVID did to the workplace, where some workers like me, absolutely privileged, I got to work at home. To me, it was just like, oh, this is the greatest thing. I am wearing clothes today. I mean, I work a lot with, I didn't have to take a shower. I didn't have to put on clothing. I work from my home. I do most of my work on computer. But then there were people who were forced to go to work, and people in places like meatpacking plants, who are some of the lowest paid and most exploited and abused workers in our system. If they were told, well, you're essential, you've got to go to work and risk your life cutting chickens apart, because Americans expect that damn chicken to be in the supermarket when they go shopping. So there was this great disruption in the labor force where some people got to stay at home. Some jobs were canceled and didn't come back. Others were rearranged to make them work from home jobs. A big disruption in the labor force, leading to what people are calling the Great Resignation. And let me say up top, there's no doubt that there's something happening that can be called the Great Resignation. In April of 2021, there was an all-time record for employees quitting jobs in 1 month, people just walking off their jobs or for one reason or another quitting. 14% of service sector workers left jobs just in the month of August alone. That doesn't mean they didn't pick up other jobs. It means they left, they quit, they resigned. So there is a thing called the Great Resignation that is going on, and it seems to be going on from the top of the economy to the bottom in all sectors of the American economic system. So there is a thing called the Great Resignation. I want to make 2 points, and they're going to be, maybe a little bit controversial, and we can talk about them during the question and answer. But one is that workers resigning from jobs is not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, the last time you had this amount or percentage of people in short periods, measurable periods, quitting jobs was the 50s and 60s, when the economy was considered to be fairly healthy, the time of high unionization rates and the coupling of productivity and wages. And the typical thing is, just as an example, would be for a union worker on his job or her job, getting skills upgrades from their union and the company, getting trained on the job, and then taking that training and walking down the street and going into another factory and getting even a better job with slightly higher pay. And that is how it worked. And that labor market mobility was a good thing for the economy. Today's Great Resignation, we are still too early in it to see if there's going to be a positive effect from it. But one of the things you don't have right now is you have the privatization of that process, whereas at one time there was a collective process for upgrading your skills through union contracts that were negotiated by strong unions that had good bargaining power, to today, where workers are not being paid a lot for these jobs, say in high-tech manufacturing, and they're expected to go get the training themselves. And so I think we have to wait a little bit to see whether this current period of resignation and mobility is a healthy thing, or if it's going to be negatively affected by the fact that workers, I wouldn't pay $8,000 to go to community college to upgrade my skills for a job that pays $16.50 an hour. It's just not worth it. It doesn't pay off in the end to go into that sort of debt, take out student loans to do that. And the final thing I want to say on the Great Resignation is, and it's a little controversial, and it is a matter of semantics and how we talk about things, but I'm going to say there is no labor shortage right now. There can't be a labor shortage under capitalism. unless there are actually demographically nobody to work in jobs that are available. There are bodies out there that can work. There are jobs that are available, but that doesn't mean there's a labor market shortage. That means that what the capitalist firm is supposed to do under those conditions is it's supposed to entice those workers with high wages and good benefits and promises of job training, and they're not doing that. And the reason they're not doing that is we now have had 40 to 30 to 40 years of the erosion of labor rights in the workplace and a lack of bargaining power and the lack of unionization. So that's what's actually going on in the labor market. There's no labor market shortage. There are workers, there are jobs. The capitalist firms have just been resistant to actually cutting into their profits and saying, hey, we've got to entice these workers into the workplace. So that's I want to move from the Great Resignation, which again, there is a process going on, to talking about it as what I'm calling the Great Refusal. And I think the Great Refusal is the culmination of all of these factors, including the Great Decoupling that undergirds it all, the recession of '08, the COVID disruption. And I think what we're seeing here is a refusal of workers at all ends of the labor markets and in all sectors, but particularly among the working class, to accept what we would call business as usual. And what is business as usual? Business as usual is, as I always go through with my students, I ask them, how many of you are working, say, in the service sector, working for a store in the mall or a fast food place? And several of them will raise their hands, and I'll say, well, describe for me the negotiating that you did over your wage when you took that job. And of course, they all just kind of scratch their heads and go, well, we didn't negotiate. They said you're going to get $10.63 an hour and no benefits, and you either take the job or you don't have to take it. And that is business as usual. And I think that is what people are really calling into question in what could be a very serious way. And so very quickly to wrap up, I know I've probably talked quite a bit already. I want to talk about four aspects of what I'm calling the Great Refusal. One is, and perhaps Derek can talk a little bit more about this, is among union workers. There is definitely something going on among the unionized sector of American workers where we're seeing more strikes. And whether we can call this a strike wave or not, I think remains to be seen. But at the very least, there are a lot of workers who are either on strike or threatening to go on strike, from coal miners in Alabama to the Nabisco workers. And then there was the threat of the strike among the TV and film producing workers in California. And John Deere, of course, that's the major strike that's going on right now. So there's definitely an uptick in strike activity and in union demands. And I think, for there's some reasons that would be more obvious. We are in a tight labor market, and that is usually when a smart union leader would say, now is the time to actually press our demands, when we're in a tight labor market. So you're seeing it among union workers. We are seeing some amazing organizing drives, including one that, if you want to look it up, I want to bring it to people's attention. There's an organizing drive going on among Amazon workers in Staten Island right now that is basically self-organized. It was just some guy who got disciplined by trying to form a formal union at an Amazon plant in Staten Island. And he has organized workers at several of these distribution centers on Staten Island, and they're going to get a National Labor Relations Board vote for a union. And that's just amazing. And of course, Amazon is one of those companies that may shut down those warehouses if they think that the vote is going to be successful. But there are some amazing organizing drives going on among non-union workers right now, which is really encouraging and kind of amazing. The other thing, the third aspect, is the refusal to endanger oneself for an inadequate wage or an inadequate compensation. And I think this is something that we're seeing up and down the labor market, including several colleagues of mine who have walked away from tenure jobs or tenure track jobs because they don't want to endanger themselves in the classroom, because they have some kind of immuno problem, or they simply don't want to be exposed to COVID, and they are walking away from jobs. And we're seeing this a lot, particularly in the service sector, where workers who have spent a lot of their lives working service sector jobs are just saying it's just not worth it for me anymore to put myself in that level of jeopardy without having the ability to make demands back saying, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I need to protect myself. So that is the third thing. The fourth thing is a little bit more vague and a little bit more theoretical, but I think it's an existential crisis that we're seeing right now in multiple workplaces, where workers are really, at all levels, really starting to question business as usual. Why do I spend this amount of my waking hours generating a profit for some other entity that I don't share in and that I have no say in? So I really think that workers, again, at all levels, are really questioning the system itself and saying, like, why should I endanger myself in order to turn a profit that somebody else is going to accumulate while I'm making a wage that barely supports a comfortable lifestyle? And what I think what we're experiencing here is something akin to the 60s and 70s, and not the flower child in the tie-dye dancing in a park, or like an anti-war protest, which I ban my students from actually using the phrase the 60s. You're just not allowed to say that. But in the 60s and 70s, what we really saw, along with all the other stuff, was a sort of workers' rebellion, particularly in the 70s among unionized workers, who started to question, well, yeah, we've got this good contract, we actually make decent money, but the work I do is just mind-numbing, and it's not creative, and it's not fulfilling. And I think a lot of workers are actually starting to ask that question and those questions. What is this thing that I do? With my commute being an hour on both ends, and I go to this place for 8 hours, it takes up 10 hours of my day when I could be spending time with my family. What is this thing I do that that I'm not adequately compensated for? So I think that there's an existential crisis of capitalism going on. It remains to be seen how far this strike wave will go, how far this sort of nascent workers' rebellion will go. But let's just say we are living in interesting times where we have the combinations of all of these other factors, plus we have the rise of a kind of anti-democratic politics that claims elections are stolen and things of that nature. All of this combining to give us this period of disruption and of dissatisfaction that I'm calling the Great Refusal. Again, remains to be seen how far it will go, but I want to end there. So that's the kind of the historical context that I wanted to give to this. So thank you for listening and putting up with me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. I know and certainly we'll send out the link to Joe's column that he put out in the Herald Times. And he talks about this Great Refusal, and so I think this is a good opportunity for a lot of people to get a little bit of the background and some of the historical context of what we're seeing right now with Striketober, as it's been called. And and so this in Striketober, obviously this is something that's hit very close to the Midwest and our surrounding regions, with Heavens Hill Distillery down in Kentucky, and of course John Deere in Moline, Illinois, and of course that's something that UAW has been involved in. And so, Derek, I'd love to get some of your perspective on this concept that Joe's referring to as the Great Refusal. Is this something that you're seeing among UAW workers, and much more generally, are you seeing some of the members of Local 440? How are they responding to the current situation?
So yeah, first off, I appreciate you inviting me here. Thank you, Dr. Varga, for a very insightful look at kind of the labor history of things. So one thing that I have particularly noticed is at Local 440 in Bedford, Indiana, we are somewhat of a melting pot. This used to be, at this facility, used to be kind of a homegrown sort of a thing. My dad worked there, my grandfather worked there, and that's kind of how you got your foot in the door. In the last 20 to 30 years, you've seen transfers coming in from other facilities. So not only are they bringing in a different way of operating in the plant and in the union, but they're also bringing a different perspective from where they came from. I mean, they may come from an area that's incredibly, strong in labor. Well, down here in Southern Indiana, we have to fight 5, 6, 7 times as hard to get our voices heard because it's just not a labor-friendly area. So inside the plant, you have a lot of converging ideas and a lot of converging opinions. And that melting pot definitely makes for a lot of different perspectives. We have people that are vehemently against getting vaccinated. That is just their mindset, and for whatever personal reasons that they have chosen that. At our plant, we have a pretty strict protocol. Right now, as you come into the plant, you have to put on a face mask, you have to sanitize your hands, and you have to wear that face mask throughout the facility. So it's become a part of our PPE. And there was some grumbling about that, about a little bit of personal liberty. But now the big conversation is about the new OSHA regulations. There's some new OSHA regulations that have come out that are going to take place, that are going to come into effect in January, and that's causing a lot of conversation, friendly and otherwise conversation on the floor about specifically what they can do to mandate that sort of vaccination. Can they actually ask for my vaccination records? Can they force me to be vaccinated to hold this job? And the OSHA regulations, the union is still working through finding out some details to that, and trying to answer some of those questions. The big answer is that it's not really, there's not one answer. There's not one perspective. There's 73 different perspectives that come from the floor. And all of them are justifiable. One thing that I have noticed, I mean, in kind of touching on what he's talking about, the great refusal, and we have noticed a limitation, a constriction in our labor pool. But in this area, if you wanted a job at General Motors in Bedford, Indiana, you won the lottery. 30 years ago, it was a lottery ticket, and you're like, my family is set. And the big reason for that was because they had a union contract, and that union would guarantee wages, conditions, benefits that would set you up for a successful life. Now, I think people are seeing some of the wages as they have stagnated. They don't want to subject themselves to working in a factory for wages that won't set them up for life. Not necessarily for life, but set them up so that they can actually enjoy. Like Professor Varga said, his father being able to, it's a one-income household. That doesn't exist even in union environments. A lot of these people, their wives and significant others or husbands are working a second job. So we are seeing a labor shortage. We are seeing a lot of different opinions when it comes to what COVID has done to the labor market. And it's not over with. The conversation is continuing. And for an organization that is supposed to be about the collective good, it's incredibly difficult when you have such strong, independent, and personal feelings that a lot of people feel like their personal freedoms are under attack. And legitimately so. I mean, if people can make very well articulated arguments on why they feel that way, but as a union, we are supposed to be arguing for a larger collective and the greater good of everybody that works there. And sometimes the confluence of those things, they clash really, really hard.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think we've heard so much insightful analysis on this issue as it is. And I do want to remind folks that we do have the little Q&A button that is down below. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask of our esteemed panelists, Please do so, and we would love to get to as many of the questions as you can possibly come up with. But as I was listening to Derek talk, I mean, this is one of those. There's like always that sort of clash between individualism and collectivism, right? And so sometimes we have a lot of these individual needs and these individual liberties, but understanding too that worker solidarity is something that really depends on the collective and people being able to put those individual opinions into one group in order to bargain and negotiate for better wages. So I'm curious then how you might see, especially as we're existing here in Indiana, we're a right to work state. And so this is typically one of the states that's not thought of as having the most labor friendly policies in the country. So I was curious, if you see there being a possibility for a more of a multi-ideological union movement. So rather than necessarily being something that might have having been associated with kind of left-wing or progressive movements in the past, but something that you might have people who have different opinions on whether or not they want to be vaccinated or whether the mask requirements really appeals to their sense of workers' rights or not, but there's still right there the underlying ethic of we want respect on the job. And so I want to see get your opinions there on if there are opportunities for, I guess, a multi-perspective organizing around issues of common concerns about respect on the job. And I'll let either one of you kind of jump in on that.
Yeah, so if you would, Professor, so this is an opportunity and an open door for something to get discussed. One thing that the AFL-CIO and the UAW have been implementing in the last 2, 3, 4 years is kind of exactly what you're talking about. This multi-dimensional cultural background and in the way of organizing, but more particularly, we've been working on a project called Path to Power. And through the political side of it, one thing that we're focusing on is less the D or the R, less the liberal or conservative, and we're trying to get union members elected to public office. So you could foresee somebody being a Republican and they're a union member as well, but the union, the AFL-CIO and Brett Voorhees and his group are incredible. We've been working with Danny Ernstus in Indianapolis with the UAW and trying to get union members elected, kind of to not ignore or push to the side those cultural things, those social aspects of people's politics, but putting more of a focus on, we want people who are going to be worker friendly. We're not just going to go to the guy who says, I support workers' rights because I believe in collective bargaining. Okay, well, you may not understand exactly what collective bargaining is. If you're a union member, you know exactly what collective bargaining is. So the drive and the push is that there's a model in New Jersey where they kind of started this program, and they start focusing on low-end political office. You're looking for people to run for city council, run for the school board, things like that are union members. D or R, it doesn't matter. We're not worried about that. What your social position is, we're gonna go on your union position. And those folks over the course of time, that's gonna be your bench to running for state senate and then running for governor, running for lieutenant governor, running for US Senate. And those people that have that union background that come off of the factory floor in a lot of cases, they're the ones that are gonna be the ones in the legislative halls making those decisions. So from a political aspect, that's kind of a direction, as you were talking about, different and diverging social aspects of what the union kind of comes about. That's one thing that we are focusing on, is trying to get union members elected into all number of positions. And we've been successful so far, and it's something that we continue to grow on. Again, DOR doesn't matter to us. Here locally, we supported a union brother who was a Republican, but we knew that he had come off of the floor. He was doing construction, And it didn't matter to us if there was a DRNR next to his name. He was a union brother. And that resonates with people. And where we're at, again, this melting pot idea, you've got a lot of strong Democrats, you've got a lot of strong Republicans. But one thing that they can't get behind is this is a union brother. This is somebody that you may be working right next to. He's running that machine over there, or he's fixing this over here. That makes that connection that people are drawn to.
Derek, before you mute, can I ask you? I don't mean to put you on the spot. Your contract down in Bedford still has a tier in it, or has tiers still? And I'm only asking because I want to talk about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Coming out of the bankruptcy in 08, 09, one of the things that got introduced into our contract was a tier system.
Yeah.
So that tier system was, the UAW doesn't call it tier system, but everybody kind of, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So there's a tier, there's a older school member, and then there's a newer member.
Right.
And in the last couple of contracts, they've tried to phase that out as a grow into it, but the benefits are still not the same as they would be if you would have hired in 2000. So it does still exist.
One of the reasons I ask is I was thinking about my own experience when I was a Teamster, and I'd served as a shop steward. I was on 2 contract teams, and the last contract we actually went on strike over a tier system, and we got most of it removed. Let me explain for those of you who are listening, if you don't know. A tiered contract is when you have a contract for an existing unionized workforce. They have this level of wages, they have this level of benefits, but the agreement in the contract is the next workers who are hired are going to be at a second tier. And for the most part, they never get to the top tier. They're always kind of just below it. And companies have used this for such, variety of reasons. If you want to sell a company, you're better off by lowering your wage and compensation debt. But also, I think the biggest thing that it does, and this is what I heard from Kevin. We were talking about our friend Kevin Beasley before, who works for the local down in Bedford, is that the new guys coming in were not only imbued with a kind of different, political view from the media that they consumed, and concerning things like the COVID vaccine, but they also came in going, well, why don't I make as much as that other guy who's been here for a long time? And what is this union doing for me? And so I think what I'm seeing I think the deer strike has part of this. One of the other ones, maybe it's Nabisco, or maybe it was the Kellogg's one. They are about one of the big issues is getting rid of the tier system, because it disrupts what we in the labor movement call solidarity. And solidarity is the key to fighting for workers' rights. If you have a divided workforce, that is, you could have a workforce that disagrees about things like the COVID vaccine. And the COVID vaccine is a tough one for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of people. Like, I think everybody should be goddamn vaccinated. But, you do have, if you are a labor union representative, you represent everybody in that workforce. And I'm sure that Derek, has had the experience somewhere in his career of defending somebody he didn't necessarily want to defend in a dispute, a discipline dispute, or something like that. But that's what you're there for. You're there to represent everybody, not the ones that you agree with. And so those issues, I think, can be overcome by workplace solidarity. If we have a movement where, we're supporting politicians at the local level who are union members or ex-union members, and the reason we're supporting them is because at that local level, they're going to support workers' rights. They're going to support a living wage ordinance. They're going to support a rise in the local minimum wage. And they're going to take that eventually to the state house, where, of course, we're handcuffed on living wage laws by the state legislature. those are the things that can overcome those other cultural issues. The thing that this discussion made me think of was one of the first things I got involved with, and I ended up writing about this, was in 2011, the strike at the Indiana Limestone Company. And I remember going down to the picket line and talking to this one guy. He's a great guy, had worked there for 25 years. And he saw my long hair and he said, I love that Michael Moore. I love Michael Moore. He's one of my favorite people. And then I asked him who he was going to support in the presidential run in 2012. And he said, Ron Paul. And my brain melted. I'm like, so you love Michael Moore, but you're going to vote for Ron Paul for president. And that's the kind of politics that you have to deal with. That if you're going to represent workers in Southern Indiana, and you're going to be the union rep for a workforce that is that diverse, you have to deal with a guy who loves Michael Moore but is going to vote for Ron Paul in a presidential election. So I think the way to do that is focusing on those bread and butter workplace issues that unions have always done. I mean, that's the initial split in the labor movement comes out of the 19th century, and the Samuel Gompers idea of what do union workers want, was the question somebody asked Gompers, and he said more, and that was always his focus. Let's focus on the workplace. Let's focus on getting more for our members and for our workers. And the other view was, of course, the Eugene Debs view that said, no, the labor movement should be about societal change, and how we meld those two things while holding that coalition together. I've been involved in labor and labor politics for way longer than I want to admit, for over 35 years. And real progress in the labor movement is always slow. And it's always has to be long-term. It's never, we have periods like this where we should probably hit hard on some issues because we have a disruption in business as usual. But overall, it has to be long-term. There has to be a longer view. And that longer view includes things like, let's start trying to get people elected at the local level and the school board level. And at the city council level. So that's my kind of mixed up answer to your question, Mark.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback onto that, Walter Reuther had said, and Walter Reuther was the president of the UAW, not the first president, but one of the first presidents, and he'd served the longest. He had said, what good is another $1 in the paycheck if the local park is crumbling down? What does that matter? So there is this melting together of social and workplace issues that has been interwoven into the fabric of the UAW, but it is the culture that we live in now. It makes it incredibly difficult to kind of keep those two things together.
Yeah, I think a great update on that, Derek, would be, what good is another $1 in the paycheck, $1 an hour in the paycheck, when both my partner and I have to work and we have to pay $8,000 for childcare, and instead of having childcare be a public good that's paid for through the public coffers. So yeah, there's something that I think workers might be able to get with across those ideological lines is, if you're getting another $1 an hour, but the price of childcare is through the roof and you can't even find childcare. So maybe your partner can't work and you have to cut back on all sorts of other things for your older children. That's something that could probably cross those ideological boundaries.
Thanks. I'm jumping in because Mark texted me and told me he's having trouble unmuting. So we're having glitches. But look, that's why we're a team. And I see some great questions coming through. And Charlotte got your message. She has an observation that she sees a country on strike and need for infrastructure. And I know you'd like to ask a question about that, but we can't unmute the audience. So I wonder if you could type it in for us, or if that just prompts any thoughts. The country on strike, but the need for infrastructure. Any thoughts on the balance that we need to strike there?
Well, I like the concept of the country on strike. I mean, I think that's what I'm talking about. Like, obviously, not everybody is on strike. But again, if we want to think of it in terms of a great refusal, there is, in fact, a larger systemic questioning of why we do what we do. And one of the things, one of my favorite, again, it's a little academic, but one of my favorite writers is a Frenchman named Henri Lefebvre, who's been dead for a long time now. He's a dead old white guy, and he said that the capitalist system is so tenuous that it has to make this enormous effort all the time to keep workers doing what they do, because most of them are being exploited, and most of them are not doing what they want to do. They're not, hunting in the morning and fishing in the evening and then spending time with their family and studying philosophy. They're having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to get by. And I think that we're starting to see more and more workers at all levels, maybe not going on physical strike, but sort of going on a mental strike and saying, like, why do we do this? What is the satisfaction for me when my community is crumbling, when my political system is so unstable, and when now I'm faced with rising prices, but not rising wages. So yeah, I think it's a legit thing. On the infrastructure part, yeah, I was listening to Uncle Joe Biden this morning on NPR saying that here we go, you're going to have so many jobs. He was talking to the workers in the ports out in California, and he said, you're going to have so much work, you're going to hate me eventually. And I'd like to think that that's true, but he sounded a lot like our previous president, who said the same thing to American workers, that I'm going to make you all rich. We're all going to have so much work, we're not going to know what to do with it. And those things, sometimes they're not up to a president, and they're not up to the Congress. And I think that sometimes for workers, particularly at the level of wage workers, their ability to actually enjoy life and to have decent conditions is up to them and to us to organize amongst ourselves.
Yeah, very good points. And jump in, Derek, if you have anything to add to that. It certainly must be a challenge to policymakers as well, but that's a different topic. Got a couple other questions here, and this one kind of is a good segue to how are labor and management discussions impacted by the current climate? I think there's probably so many ways they are, even just to switch to virtual, right? So just like everything else, how has the current climate and COVID and everything else going on impacted the ability of labor and management to have discussions as they used to? Does that look different now?
Derek, I'll definitely defer to you on that one. So, but I'll chime
in. So at our facility, we were on a temporary layoff for probably 6 or 7 weeks when COVID really kicked up in the spring of last year. And we work in a facility where it's not something that you can do remotely. You have to run the machines. We're an aluminum die cast facility, so we actually have to make the cylinder heads and make the converter housings and transmission cases and things like that. We have to actually physically be there to do that sort of thing. There was a period after that where there were some jobs that could have been done remotely, but for the most part, everything was kind of back into the facility. What we ended up doing, and GM across the board started doing, is they actually had specific COVID cleaners like we have at our plant. They would come and do touch point cleaning. We would have limitations to how many people could be in a room. Again, like I said earlier, you have to wear a mask everywhere in the facility. That's a non-negotiable issue. And I think for the most part, it has worked out fairly well. We've been fortunate that we've not suffered too much as in some other industries. Now, mind you, we've lost people have lost family members and loved ones in our facility, and due to COVID, and that's never an easy thing. But it kind of it kind of brings it home a little bit that this is something that we have to be serious about. And if we're really going to get anywhere, we're going to have to work with management to make sure that everybody's safe, because having a union contract, I could put that union contract over my mouth and it doesn't protect me from COVID any more than it would protect, somebody in management. So it's a very real human aspect to the relationship between union and management. So yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, we really have worked through that. Go ahead.
Well, and really, I was asking with when I mentioned virtual, have your discussions when you have to get together and negotiate, has that looked different because of COVID, and is that impacting your ability to communicate effectively? I mean, I'm just thinking of my own world where, things shifted to virtual or email, and it's just not the same as getting in a room with some people sometimes and what you can accomplish there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that kind of is, we did still meet in person once that little hiatus happened. We were still meeting in person again. The GM UAW protocols that kind of limited the number of people in a room. You had to have a bigger room if you wanted to bring more people in. We were still meeting face to face. A lot of the stuff on the union side was done virtually. I think you have some of the older folks that are having to learn what Zoom is and trying to have effective communication that way. We were limited into our union membership meetings, how many people we could have. We actually canceled them for a good period of time. And we have a great shop chairman, Chad Melspaugh, who I've worked very well together with, and we have kind of developed this. We do videos now that kind of attach to what we say at the union meetings and the information that we get from management. So part of it has gone virtual. You have to communicate that way, because there are still people that I'm not coming to the union hall because I still have this fear. But yeah, as far as in the plant goes, it has mostly still been in person with all of these caveats around masks, hand sanitizer, wiping things down, limits to the room, and all of that stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Can people hear me?
I think you've got an echo though from the other one.
Okay, I'll let you.
Close down your other, you're on twice, Mark, so maybe if you close one of them down, you'd get rid of that reverb.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we've got a couple more questions from the audience. So let's look at this one from Abby, reading a lot lately about private equity buyouts in lots of different industries like healthcare, nursing homes being the most egregious, perhaps, but also large food companies and housing. It often leads to layoffs and negative impacts on worker safety. Is there a concern about how this trend might impact workers' rights in Indiana specifically?
Well, again, I'll speak to the one experience that I mentioned before. It already has. When we participated, a bunch of us, in the labor movement locally, participated in that strike in 2011. The reason those workers were on strike at the limestone company was that limestone company was no longer owned by some entity that was interested in putting out limestone. They had been bought by a private equity firm, and they were part of a platform. They were part of the extractive platform. And so there was really nobody to negotiate with. And what those people wanted, Resilience Capital Partners, what they wanted was they wanted to bust that union so that they could sell that company. They could break it up, sell its component parts, and get their highest profit out of selling it. So they were not interested. They forced that union to go out on strike. They made demands in their contract negotiation that they knew the union couldn't accept, because they wanted them on strike, because they figured a strike would break the union, because guys would go back to work. They'd cross the line eventually. Those guys held the line and did an amazing job, but eventually the company did close down. It went into bankruptcy. The union is gone. So that process is like, that cat is out of the bag. It is long out of the bag. And what we can do about private equity and investment in private corporations, and now in housing, buying up things like trailer parks, right, so that they can squeeze more money out of people who are renting trailers and trailer parks. The only solution to I posted a guillotine on Facebook yesterday. If you were looking for solutions, I don't know what the solution to that is, except for more solidarity and more of that. Let's take those workplace issues and maybe take them more out into the public and say, we need more fights for the common good.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, well, and as we're wrapping up, you can see a lot of interest in the audience about how we're supporting, workers at the lower ends of the pay scale, in these. How are we going to support workers in maintaining the economic freedom that they're earning right now through all this, and just lots of good questions and interest. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of these. We've got just a couple minutes left. So I thought if you have any closing thoughts, you're welcome to share them. Otherwise, we will be sharing with the audience a follow-up communication via email, and can put lots of good links and resources and articles in there. But as we wind down, any final thoughts?
So the one thing that you just touched on, how people can support the lower end wages, is one, kind of be understanding of the fight that they're in, and two, focus your efforts locally. Instead of going to the big, I won't mention any names, the big bean coffee place, go to the local roaster.
Yeah.
Go to the local roaster and buy a shirt. Get a cup of coffee and buy a shirt. That kind of helps promote that.
Yeah.
Thinking local will never go out of style.
Nice.
I saw Larry's question in the Q&A, and I just want to address it really briefly because we got to go. But that is why I ended that piece in the HT, the Striketober piece, on a bit of a pessimistic note, saying we don't know whether this is going to turn into a strike wave. We don't know whether this is going to turn into some kind of overall rebellion, because workers in this country they've been getting screwed for 30 to 40 years in workers' rights. And it is so difficult, and I know Derek knows this, it is so difficult to organize the unorganized workers in this country when you don't have protections. We have an act in Congress that can't even get out of committee. And what do we, every 4 years, we support a Democratic president. Every 2 years, unions get out on the street and we support Democratic representatives for Congress. And we can't even get the PRO Act out of committee right now. And it's a shame. And the PRO Act would actually strengthen the ability of workers to form unions in the workplace. And it's not going anywhere. And what'll bring the PRO Act out of committee? Maybe a couple 100,000 people in Washington stopping Congress from operating until it actually gets passed. So, yeah,
a strike per se.
A strike, yeah, something like that, yeah.
You heard it here, folks. We'll share more info and how you can get involved in that. And all these other topics that are pertinent to the future of labor, and what we can do right now to help shape that and help support our brothers and sisters out there who are leading the charge. So a big thank you to both of you, Derek, Joe. Thanks, Mark, for your moderation until technology failed us. And a big thank you to all of the audience members. Stay tuned. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Round of applause for everyone. Mm-hmm. Stay tuned for a follow-up email with some more links and resources. And we so appreciate both of you. I learned so much. I know I'm inspired to follow up on some things, and hopefully the audience is too. So lots of gratitude, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.